The massive chamber fell silent as Ambassador Sarah Chen stepped forward. Around her, towering alien forms cast shadows across the polished crystal floor of the Galactic Council's most sacred hall. 500 species had gathered for this moment. The day humanity would learn its fate. High Counselor Zexithara rose from his throne, his serpentine body coiling with disdain. His 4 eyes glowed with contempt as he looked down at the small human woman who barely reached his knee. Species designation: human. His voice boomed through translation devices across the chamber. Planet of origin: Earth. After careful consideration of your application, the Galactic Council has reached its decision. Sarah's heart pounded. 3 years of negotiations had led to this moment. Earth desperately needed the Council's protection. Without it, the growing threats in the Outer Rim would eventually find their way to humanity's doorstep. "We find your species." Zexithara paused, letting silence stretch like a knife blade. "Pathetically weak." A ripple of cruel laughter echoed through the chamber. Sarah felt her face burn with shame, but she stood straighter. "Your technology is primitive," continued another counselor, a crystalline being whose voice sounded like breaking glass. "Your military is laughable. Your genetic makeup is inferior. You possess no notable abilities, no unique contributions to offer our great civilization." The chamber erupted in alien sounds. What Sarah realized were expressions of mockery and amusement. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Zexithara raised a clawed appendage for silence. "Therefore, humanity is denied membership in the Galactic Council. Furthermore, we declare Earth a protected zone." Sarah's blood turned to ice. Protected zone was council speak for a planetary zoo. Earth would be quarantined, its people treated like exotic animals, forbidden from expanding beyond their solar system. However, Zexithara's eyes glittered with malice. "We are not completely heartless. We offer humanity a chance to prove its worth." He gestured, and a holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber. It showed a barren, hostile world, scarred by constant warfare. "Kethvar," Zexithara announced. "A death world in the Terminus sector. For 10 standard years, our greatest warriors have tried and failed to pacify the native Vectar. They are savage, violent creatures who have resisted all attempts at civilization." The display zoomed in, showing hulking armored beasts with razor-sharp claws and glowing red eyes. "If humanity can accomplish what our elite forces could not, if you can bring peace to Kethvar, then perhaps we will reconsider your status." The chamber fell silent again. Sarah stared at the images of the monstrous Vectar, her mind racing. This wasn't an opportunity. It was a death sentence disguised as one. "And if we refuse?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear clawing. At her throat, Zexithara's mouth stretched into what might have been a smile. "Then Earth remains quarantined forever. Your species will slowly wither and die, never knowing what lies beyond your tiny blue world." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of Earth, of her daughter playing in the garden, of the billions of people counting on her decision. When she opened them again, her gaze was steel. "Humanity accepts your challenge." The chamber erupted, in surprised murmurs and cruel laughter. Zexithara leaned forward, his eyes burning with anticipation. "Excellent. You have 1 standard year to prepare. After that, we will transport your army to Kethvar. Try not to die too quickly. We so enjoy a good show." As Sarah turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of something in the shadows at the back of the chamber, a figure watching her with what looked almost like sympathy. But when she looked again, it was gone. Walking through the gleaming corridors toward her ship, Sarah's mind was already racing with plans. The Council had made one critical mistake. They thought they were sending humanity to die. They had no idea they had just declared war on the most dangerous species in the galaxy. General Marcus Rodriguez stood in the war room buried 3 kilometers beneath the Colorado mountains. Around him, Earth's finest military minds studied holographic projections of Kethvar while Sarah Chen finished her report. "They expect us to fail," Sarah concluded, her voice bitter. "This isn't a test, it's an execution." The room was silent, except for the hum of quantum computers processing intelligence data. Admiral Lisa Kowalski was the first to speak. "The Vektar have repelled 47 Council expeditions," she said, reading from her tablet. "Each force was at least 50,000 strong, equipped with advanced energy weapons and atmospheric processors. The largest force numbered 200,000. "How many survived?" asked Colonel James Park, head of Special Operations. "None." The weight of that single word settled over the room like a shroud. Rodriguez rubbed his temples, feeling the burden of Earth's future pressing down on him. "Show me the enemy," he ordered. The hologram shifted, displaying detailed scans of the Vektar. The creatures stood 3 meters tall, their bodies covered in natural armor plating. Razor-sharp claws extended from their hands, and their jaws could crush steel. But it was their eyes that chilled everyone in the room. Intelligent, calculating, filled with primal fury. "They're not just animals," observed Dr. Elena Vasquez, the xenobiologist who'd been studying the available data. "Their tactics show coordination, planning. They use the environment as a weapon. They've turned their entire world into a fortress." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "What about their weaknesses?" "Unknown," Vasquez admitted. "Every Council expedition was wiped out before. They could gather meaningful intelligence." "Sir," interrupted Lieutenant Torres, the communications officer, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the Council. They're sending us an observer." The main screen flickered, revealing a figure none of them recognized. Unlike the other Council species, this being looked almost human, if humans had silver skin and eyes like liquid mercury. "I am Cathon of the Seekers Guild," the figure said, his voice strangely melodic. "I have been assigned to document humanity's final moments on Kethvar." Rodriguez stepped forward. "And you are?" "A recorder of history. Do not concern yourself with my presence. I will not interfere with your preparations." Cathon's head tilted slightly. "Though I confess curiosity about how you plan to succeed where the Council's elite have failed." "We'll figure it out," Rodriguez replied curtly. Cathon's expression was unreadable. The Althari shock troops were the finest warriors in their sector. They lasted 6 hours. The Krexani hive mind could coordinate 1,000,000 soldiers as one. They lasted 3 days. The Vorthak Empire sent their planet-cracker weapons. The Vektar turned their own technology against them. "Are you trying to discourage us?" Sarah asked sharply. "I am merely providing context." Cathon's silver eyes seemed to peer into her soul. "Humanity has no natural advantages. You are weak, short-lived, technologically inferior. You possess no psychic abilities, no natural weapons, no exceptional, physical capabilities. By every measure the Council uses to evaluate species, you should not even qualify as a threat to a single Vektar, let alone their entire population." The room erupted in angry voices, but Rodriguez raised his hand for silence. Something in Cathon's tone suggested he wasn't finished. "And yet," the alien continued, "I have studied your species' history. You have a curious habit of achieving the impossible when pressed to your limits." Rodriguez met the alien's gaze. "What are you really here for?" For the first time, something like emotion flickered across Cathon's features. "To witness whether the Council has made a grave error in judgment." As the transmission ended, Rodriguez turned to his team. The weight of humanity's future rested on their shoulders, but for the first time since Sarah's return, he felt something other than despair. "They think we're weak because we don't have claws or psychic powers," he said quietly. "They're measuring us by their standards." "What do you mean?" Admiral Kowalski asked. Rodriguez looked around the room at the faces of Earth's defenders, men and women who had devoted their lives to protecting their home, their families, their species. They've never fought anyone who had nothing left to lose. The hologram of Kethvar rotated slowly in the center of the room. A world of death and violence where humanity would either prove itself or perish forever. But in the depths of that mountain, bunker, Earth's greatest military minds began to smile. 6 months had passed since the Council's ultimatum. Deep in the Amazon rainforest, Captain Maria Santos crawled through mud that clung to her like black paste. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she pressed herself against a fallen tree, listening for the sound that had been hunting her for 3 days. There, the snap of a branch 50 meters to her left. She was being stalked by something that shouldn't exist on Earth. The creature was one of 30 training specimens the Council had graciously provided. Juvenile Vectar, they claimed, to help humanity prepare for the real threat. The juvenile had already killed 2 of her squad mates. Santos gripped her modified rifle tighter. Standard energy weapons were useless against Vectar hide. Their natural armor absorbed directed energy like a sponge. But humans had spent millennia, perfecting a different kind of warfare. The underbrush exploded as the Vectar charged. 3 meters of muscle and bone and fury burst toward her, claws extended, jaws gaping to reveal rows of razor teeth. Santos didn't run. She didn't flinch. She pulled the trigger. The projectile that hit the creature wasn't an energy blast. It was a simple piece of metal, depleted uranium wrapped around a tungsten core, fired at 3 times the speed of sound. Physics didn't care about energy absorption. Kinetic force was kinetic force. The Vectar's charge became a tumble as the round punched through its chest armor and out its back. It crashed to the ground, twitching once before going still. Santos spoke into her comm unit. "Target down. Ballistic weapons confirmed effective." General Rodriguez's voice crackled through the static. "Understood. Return to base. We've got work to do." 3 weeks later, Rodriguez stood in what had once been a manufacturing plant in Detroit. Now it produced something the galaxy had never seen. Weapons designed specifically to kill Vectar. "The Council's forces rely on energy weapons and technology," he explained to the assembled unit commanders. "They fight with their tools. We're going to fight with our brains." He gestured to the production line where workers assembled rifles that looked nothing like the sleek energy weapons favored by galactic civilization. They were crude, mechanical things that fired metal projectiles at tremendous velocity. "Every species the Council sent to Kethvar tried to overpower the Vectar," Rodriguez continued. "Bigger guns, more soldiers, better technology. They all failed because they were playing the enemy's game." Colonel Park raised his hand. "What game are we playing?" Rodriguez smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Human warfare. The Vectar have natural armor? We'll use armor-piercing rounds. They're fast. We'll use explosives that don't care about speed. They're strong. We'll fight dirty." He pulled up tactical displays showing Earth's forces training in environments that made the Amazon look hospitable. Soldiers learning to fight in poisonous swamps, freezing tundra, and radiation-soaked wastelands. "The Council thinks we're weak because we don't have natural weapons," Rodriguez said. "They're about to learn that humans don't need natural weapons. We make better ones." In orbit around Earth, Admiral Kowalski supervised the final preparations of humanity's fleet. The ships looked nothing like the elegant vessels of the Council races. They were ugly, angular things covered in armor plating and bristling with weapons that had no place in civilized warfare. "Nuclear mines?" she asked her weapons officer. "Deployed throughout the target system, Admiral. If the Vectar try to follow our forces off-world, they'll get a surprise." "Chemical weapons?" "Loaded and ready. Biological agents are standing by." As backup, Kowalski nodded grimly. The Council had banned chemical and biological weapons as uncivilized. They preferred clean, efficient energy weapons that killed without mess or suffering. Humans had invented poison gas and plague bombs for a reason. Back on the surface, Rodriguez received one final visitor before departure. Cathon materialized. In his office like a ghost, his silver skin gleaming in the artificial light. "Your preparations are unconventional," the alien observer noted. "That's the point," Rodriguez replied without looking up from his tactical displays. "The Council expects you to fail honorably, to make a noble but futile gesture before your inevitable defeat." "The Council doesn't know humans very well." Cathon was quiet for a long moment. "I have studied the histories of every species that has faced the Vectar. All of them possessed advantages your species lacks. All of them failed." Rodriguez finally looked up. "Did any of them have a choice?" "What do you mean? Did they fight because they wanted to? Or because they had to?" Cathon's liquid eyes narrowed. "The distinction is irrelevant." "No," Rodriguez said quietly. "It's everything." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the bustling preparations. Soldiers loading weapons, engineers running final tests, families saying goodbye to loved ones who might never come home. "Every other species that fought the Vectar had something to go back to," he continued. If they lost, their worlds would still exist. Their people would still have a future. They were fighting for glory, or resources, or council approval. He turned back to Caethon. We're fighting for our children's right to exist. The alien was silent for a moment. And you believe that makes a difference? Rodriguez's smile was sharp as a blade. Ask the Vectar. Tomorrow humanity would board ships bound for a world of death and horror. They would face creatures that had slaughtered the galaxy's finest warriors. They would either succeed in an impossible mission, or die trying. But as Rodriguez looked out at his people preparing for war, he felt something the Council had never expected humanity to possess in the face of extinction: confidence. The dropships screamed through Kethvar's atmosphere like falling meteors. Inside the lead craft, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Kim checked her weapon one final time and looked at the faces of her soldiers. They were young, most of them. Volunteers who'd stepped forward when Earth called for its finest. 30 seconds to touchdown, the pilot's voice crackled through the comm. Kim activated the external cameras and immediately understood why so many Council expeditions had failed. Kethvar wasn't just a hostile world, it was a death trap designed by evolution itself. Jagged, crystalline formations jutted from the ground like spears. The atmosphere was thick with corrosive particles that ate through standard equipment in hours. Geysers of superheated gas erupted randomly across the landscape, and the very air seemed to shimmer with toxic energy. But none of that compared to the welcoming committee. The Vectar were waiting. They emerged from hidden caves and crevices like nightmares given form. Hundreds of them, then thousands, their armor-plated bodies reflecting the alien sun as they charged toward the landing zone. "Contact!" someone screamed over the comm. The dropship's defensive systems opened fire, spraying streams of projectiles into the advancing horde. Unlike the energy weapons used by previous expeditions, these rounds punched through Vectar hide with devastating effect. Creatures that had shrugged off plasma bolts fell in writhing heaps. But there were so many of them. "All units, disperse on landing," Kim ordered. "Pattern Delta, go loud, go fast." The dropships hit the ground hard, their ramps dropping before they'd fully settled. Human soldiers poured out, immediately spreading into formation patterns that hadn't been seen in the galaxy for millennia. The Vectar had adapted to fight energy weapons and advanced technology. They had no experience with coordinated infantry tactics backed by overwhelming firepower. Kim's rifle chattered as she put 3-round center mass into a charging Vectar. The creature stumbled but kept coming, ichor streaming from its wounds. She shifted aim and put her next burst through its head. "Aim for joints and heads," she shouted. "Body shots won't stop them fast enough." Around her, Earth's soldiers fought with a precision that shocked even their alien observer. Caethon, watching from a safe distance through his recording devices, had expected to witness a slaughter. Instead, he was seeing something impossible. The humans were winning. It wasn't just their weapons, though the ballistic rifles were proving devastatingly effective. It was their tactics. Where Council forces had fought as individuals or in rigid formations, the humans flowed like water, supporting each other with overlapping fields of fire and coordinated movement. When a group of Vectar tried to flank, Alpha Squad, Bravo Squad was already in position to cut them down. When the creatures attempted to break through the center, the humans simply melted away and reformed elsewhere, leaving behind mines and booby traps. "They're using the enemy's aggression against them," Caethon murmured to himself, unable to hide his fascination. The battle raged for 6 hours. When it finally ended, over 2,000 Vectar lay dead around the human perimeter. Earth's casualties numbered 67, but Kim knew this was just the beginning. The real test would come when the Vectar adapted to their tactics. She didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, her forward scouts reported something that chilled her blood. The Vectar weren't just learning, they were organizing. The creatures that had spent generations fighting as individual berserkers were now moving, in coordinated groups, using terrain and cover like professional soldiers. "Sir," Sergeant Rodriguez, no relation to the general, reported over the comm. "We've got movement on all flanks. Looks like they're trying to surround us." Kim studied her tactical display. The Vectar were doing exactly what she would do in their position, using their superior numbers and knowledge of the terrain to cut off human escape routes and force a decisive battle. "All units, Prepare for siege protocols, she ordered. If they want to box us in, we'll make them pay for every meter. As night fell over Kethavar, the humans prepared for the real war to begin. But in the darkness between the battles, something extraordinary was happening. Private Chen, a young engineer from New Beijing, was working on modifications to their equipment when she noticed something odd. The Vectar bodies they'd collected for study weren't just armored, they were adapted. Their bone density was specifically designed to resist energy weapons, their muscle structure optimized for combat against technological foes. "Colonel," she called Kim over to her improvised laboratory. "I think I know why the Council forces failed." Kim looked at the dissected Vectar remains. "Show me." Chen pointed to the creature's skeletal structure. "Look at this bone composition. It's like natural ceramic armor, perfect for stopping energy weapons, but brittle against kinetic impact." She moved to the muscular system. "And these fibers, they're designed for short bursts of incredible speed and strength, perfect for overwhelming technologically advanced opponents who rely on their equipment." Kim felt a chill of understanding. They evolved to fight the Council. Exactly. The Vectar aren't just aggressive. They're specialized predators designed to hunt advanced civilizations. As dawn broke over the alien world, Kim realized humanity hadn't just stumbled into a fight. They'd walked into the lair of creatures that had evolved specifically to kill everything the Council represented. But as she watched her soldiers preparing for another day of battle, she allowed herself a grim smile. The Vectar had evolved to hunt civilized species. They'd never faced barbarians before. 2 weeks into the campaign, General Rodriguez stood in the command bunker established in what had once been a Vectar cave complex. The irony wasn't lost on him. Humans had taken the enemy's own fortifications and turned them into their base of operations. "Status report," he ordered, as his officers gathered around the holographic display. "We've secured approximately 40 square kilometers," Colonel Park reported. "Casualties are manageable. 300 wounded, 97 killed in action. Enemy casualties are estimated at over 15,000. Admiral Kowalski's image flickered on the comm screen from orbit. The Vectar attempted another assault. On our supply lines, the orbital defense platforms dealt with them effectively. Rodriguez nodded. The platforms, automated weapon systems that fired kinetic kill vehicles, had been a revelation. The Vectar had learned to avoid human soldiers, but they couldn't adapt fast enough to avoid a tungsten rod traveling at relativistic speeds. "What? About their behavioral patterns?" Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her tablet displaying weeks of accumulated data. "They're changing, sir. Rapidly. The Vectar we're fighting now are nothing like the ones in the Council's intelligence reports." She pulled up comparative footage. The early battles showed Vectar charging and howling mobs, relying on speed and ferocity. The recent engagements showed creatures that moved with calculated precision, using cover and coordinated tactics. "They're learning from us," she continued. "Not just adapting, actively studying our methods and incorporating them into their own strategy." "How is that possible?" Park asked. "They're supposed to be barely sentient." "The Council was wrong," Vasquez replied grimly. "The Vectar aren't primitive. They're evolutionary perfectionists. Every generation incorporates successful survival traits from the previous one. They've been fighting advanced civilizations for so long, they've become living weapons designed to counter superior technology." Rodriguez studied the tactical display. Red markers showed known Vectar positions, a complex network of tunnels, and fortifications that seemed to shift daily as the creatures adapted to human tactics. "Show me the deep scans," he ordered. The display zoomed into the planet's crust, revealing something that made everyone in the bunker fall silent. The tunnel system wasn't random. It was a three-dimensional maze that connected every major landmass on the planet. But more disturbing were the massive chambers deep underground, each one containing thousands of heat signatures. "Dear God," whispered Admiral Kowalski from orbit. "How many of them are there?" Dr. Vasquez checked her calculations. "Conservative. Estimate, 50 million, possibly twice that." The weight of that number settled over the room like a death shroud. Humanity had brought 100,000 soldiers to Kethavar. They were outnumbered 500 to 1 minimum. "Sir," Lieutenant Torres interrupted. "We're receiving a transmission from the Council. High priority." Zexathara's serpentine form materialized in the center of the bunker, his four eyes glowing with what looked like anticipation. Greetings, General Rodriguez. We trust you are enjoying your stay on Kethavar? Rodriguez's expression didn't change. We're managing. Indeed. Our observers report some initial success on your part. Most impressive for such a limited species. Zexathara's tone dripped with condescension. However, we feel it's only fair to inform you of something we may have forgotten to mention. The general felt ice forming in his stomach. Which is? The Vektar you've been fighting are juveniles. Adolescents, really. The mature specimens have been watching your tactics with great interest. The hologram shifted, showing new footage from the deep tunnels. The creatures emerging from the planetary depths were nothing like the ones humanity had been fighting. They were larger, more heavily armored, and moved with an intelligence that was unmistakably sentient. Adult Vektar are considerably more capable than their offspring, Zexathara continued. They should reach your position within the next few days. Do try to make their hunt entertaining. The transmission ended, leaving the bunker in stunned silence. Sir, Park said quietly, recommend immediate evacuation. We can't fight those things. Rodriguez stared at the images of the approaching adult Vektar. Each one was twice the size of the creatures they'd been fighting, with armor that looked like it could stop anti-tank rounds. But it was their eyes that chilled him. Intelligent, calculating, filled with the patience of apex predators. Sir, Park pressed. Your orders? Rodriguez looked around the bunker at his officers, men and women who had followed him to hell itself. Then he looked at the tactical display showing Earth soldiers scattered across Kethavar's surface, outnumbered, and facing an enemy that had just become infinitely more dangerous. We're not evacuating, he said quietly. Sir, Colonel Park, how long did the Council's last expedition survive? 6 hours, sir. But these are adult. How long have we been here? Park checked his chronometer. 14 days, 18 hours. Rodriguez nodded. We've already done something the Council thought was impossible. We've survived long enough to see what the Vektar really are. He turned to face his officers, and they saw something in his eyes that made them straighten unconsciously. The Gi. Council sent us here to die, he continued. They expected us to fail quickly and quietly, proving that humanity deserves to be caged like animals. Instead, we've killed 20,000 of their supposedly unstoppable monsters. He gestured to the tactical display. Now they're sending the real threat, hoping to finish us off before we do any more damage to their narrative. What are you saying, sir? Kowalski asked from orbit. Rodriguez's smile was sharp as a knife. I'm saying the Council just made a mistake. They've given us a chance to fight their champions instead of their children. He turned to Dr. Vasquez. Doctor, you said the Vektar are evolutionary perfectionists. What happens when a perfect predator meets something it's never encountered before? Vasquez thought for a moment. Then her eyes widened as understanding dawned. It has to adapt or die. Exactly. And adaptation takes time. Rodriguez looked around. The bunker, one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, the Council is about to learn why humanity doesn't fight fair. Outside, in the alien darkness of Kethavar, something roared in the distance. The sound was answered by a dozen others, then 100, as the planet's true guardians began their march toward the human perimeter. But deep in their stolen bunker, Earth's defenders began to smile. The adult Vektar arrived at dawn, and Colonel Sarah Kim understood immediately why no Council expedition had survived long enough to report on them. They didn't charge like their younger counterparts. They stalked. Through her scope, Kim watched a mature specimen study her defensive positions with the patience of a professional soldier. It was massive, 4 meters tall, covered in armor that looked like it had been forged rather than grown. But it was the intelligence in its eyes that made her blood run cold. Movement on all vectors, Sergeant Rodriguez reported. They're not attacking. They're positioning. Kim switched her tactical display to thermal imaging and immediately saw the pattern. The adult Vektar were surrounding the human perimeter in a perfect encirclement, each one positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire while maintaining escape routes. They're using military tactics, she breathed. The attack, when it came, was nothing like the frenzied assaults they'd grown accustomed to. The Vectar moved with coordinated precision, using suppressive fire from natural weapons while advancing by bounds. They employed cover, flanking maneuvers, and tactical retreats. Kim's rifle barked as she put rounds into a Vectar attempting to breach their perimeter. The bullets that had easily penetrated juvenile armor barely scratched the adult's hide. "Switch to armor piercing," she ordered. "Standard rounds aren't effective." But even as her soldiers adapted, the Vectar were adapting faster. When the humans switched to heavier ammunition, the creatures changed their approach, using hit-and-run tactics that minimized their exposure. When the humans adjusted their defensive positions, the Vectar shifted their assault patterns. It was like fighting an enemy that could read their minds. "Colonel!" Private Martinez's voice cracked with panic. "They're in the wire!" Kim spun to see something impossible. A group of Vectar had somehow bypassed their motion sensors and perimeter alarms, approaching through what should have been impossible terrain. They weren't just intelligent, they were learning to think like humans. The battle raged for 8 hours. When it finally ended, Kim's force had been reduced by half, and they'd managed to kill only dozen Vectar. "Fall back to secondary positions," she ordered, her voice hoarse from shouting commands over the sound of gunfire. In the main bunker, General Rodriguez watched tactical displays showing similar reports from across the planet. Every human position was under coordinated assault by creatures that fought with intelligence and patience. "Casualties?" he asked grimly. "Heavy," Admiral Kowalski reported from orbit. "We've lost 30% of our ground forces in the first day of adult contact." Dr. Vasquez looked up from her analysis station. "General, I'm seeing behavioral patterns that shouldn't be possible." "Explain." "The adult Vectar aren't just adapting to our tactics, they're predicting them. They're anticipating our responses and preparing counters before we even implement changes." Rodriguez felt a chill of understanding. "They're not just evolutionary perfectionists, they're learning." "More than that," Vasquez continued. "I think they're sharing information. The creatures fighting Colonel Kim are using tactics developed by the ones engaging Major Harrison's unit 200 kilometers away." "A hive mind?" "No. Something more sophisticated. They're maintaining individual intelligence while sharing tactical knowledge across the entire population." The implications hit Rodriguez like a physical blow. They weren't fighting individual creatures or even coordinated groups. They were fighting a single planetary intelligence that was learning from every encounter. "Sir?" Lieutenant Torres interrupted. "Incoming transmission from the Council." Zexathera's image appeared, his expression one of mock sympathy. "General Rodriguez, we're receiving rather distressing reports from Kethvar. It appears your forces are facing some difficulties." "We're managing," Rodriguez replied through gritted teeth. "Indeed. However, the Council feels it would be merciful to offer you one final opportunity to surrender. Your surviving forces will be granted safe passage off-world, and humanity will be allowed to live in quarantine with minimal restrictions." "And if we refuse?" Zexthera shrugged, a gesture that looked grotesque on his serpentine body. "Then you will join the 47 other expeditions that have tried and failed to pacify Kethvar. The adult Vectar have never been defeated, General. Not once in 10,000 years." Rodriguez looked around the bunker at his officers, men and women who had followed him into hell itself. Then he looked at the tactical displays showing his forces being systematically dismantled by an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. "I need time to consider your offer," he said finally. "Of course. You have 12 hours to decide." The transmission ended, leaving the bunker in heavy silence. "Sir," Colonel Park said quietly, "the Council's offer isn't unreasonable. We've proven humanity can fight. Maybe that's enough." Rodriguez nodded slowly, then walked to the communication console. "All units, this is actual. Implement Protocol 7. I repeat, Protocol 7 is now active." Park's eyes widened. "Sir, that's necessary," Rodriguez interrupted. He turned to face his officers, and they saw something in his expression that made them step back involuntarily. "So the Jewel Vectar think they know how humans fight because they've watched us for 2 weeks," he said quietly. "They've adapted to our tactics, our weapons, our strategies." He smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression any of them had ever seen. "They have no idea what humans do when fighting fair doesn't work." Outside, in the alien darkness of Kethvar, The adult Vectar continued their patient siege, confident in their inevitable victory. They had learned to counter human tactics, human weapons, human strategies. They had never learned to counter human desperation, and Rodriguez was about to teach them the difference between civilization and survival. Protocol 7 had been developed in the deepest classified levels of Earth's military command. It was a strategy so ruthless, so beyond the boundaries of civilized warfare, that it had never been implemented in human history. Until now. Colonel Sarah Kim received her orders and read them twice, unable to believe what she was seeing. Then, she looked at the Vectar position surrounding her remaining troops and understood. "All units, prepare for full deployment," she ordered. "Chemical, biological, and nuclear assets are cleared for immediate use." The adult Vectar had adapted to human tactics because they were still thinking in terms of conventional warfare. They expected their enemies to fight with honor, to follow rules, to maintain some semblance of civilized behavior. They had never fought a species with its back against the wall. The first phase began at midnight. Human artillery units that had been carefully conserved throughout the campaign began firing shells that released clouds of engineered toxins into Kethvar's atmosphere. The compounds were specifically designed to target the Vectar's unique respiratory system, something humanity had learned from weeks of studying their biology. The creatures that had shrugged off energy weapons and armor-piercing rounds began to suffocate in their own tunnels. But chemical warfare was just the beginning, as the Vectar retreated to sealed underground chambers. Humanity's next gift arrived from orbit. Biological weapons, viruses and bacterial agents that had been tailored specifically to Vectar physiology, rained down from the sky in dispersal pods. The adult Vectar's intelligence became their weakness. They understood what was happening to them. They felt their own bodies turning against them as engineered plagues attacked their immune systems. For the first time in 10,000 years, the apex predators of Kethvar experienced fear. But Rodriguez wasn't finished. "Deploy the nuclear devices," he ordered. Admiral Kowalski's voice crackled with shock over the comm. "Sir, that will irradiate half the planet." "The Vectar adapted to every conventional weapon we threw at them," Rodriguez replied coldly. "Let's see them adapt to nuclear fire." The warheads weren't aimed at Vectar positions. They were targeted at the planet's geological weak points, places where the explosions would trigger massive seismic events. As the atomic fire bloomed across Kethvar's surface, the carefully maintained tunnel system that had protected the species for millennia began to collapse. Entire sections of the planetary underground were buried under millions of tons of rock. The survivors found themselves trapped in isolated pockets, cut off from their fellows, unable to share the tactical knowledge that had made them so dangerous. From his command bunker, Cathon watched the tactical displays with growing horror. The silver-skinned observer had expected to document humanity's noble failure. Instead, he was witnessing something that would haunt his dreams for the rest of his immortal life. "This is genocide," he whispered. General Rodriguez turned to face him, and Cathon saw no mercy in the human's eyes. "No, this is survival. The Council will never accept this. You've violated every law of civilized warfare. The Council declared war on humanity when they sent us here to die," Rodriguez replied. "Did you think we would go quietly?" On the surface, the few remaining adult Vectar emerged from their collapsing tunnels, gasping for breath in air that burned their lungs. They found themselves facing human soldiers who wore full environmental suits and carried weapons that fired rounds tipped with radioactive material. The creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for 10,000 years died like animals, hunted through their own ruined world by predators more ruthless than they had ever imagined. Colonel Kim stood over the body of the last adult Vectar in her sector. The magnificent creature that had seemed invincible just days before was now a broken thing, its armor cracked, its eyes dim with defeat. "Contact all units," she ordered. "Begin sweep and clear operations. Any Vectar that survived goes into containment." It took 3 more days to secure the planet. When the final reports came in, the numbers were staggering. Of an estimated 50 million Vectar, fewer than 10,000 remained alive, mostly juveniles that had been deep enough underground to avoid the worst of humanity's assault. "General." Rodriguez stood in what had been the planet's primary Vectar city, now a radioactive crater visible from orbit. Around him, His soldiers were establishing containment facilities for the survivors. "Sir," Dr. Vasquez approached, her environmental suit clicking with radiation warnings. "The remaining Vectar, they're not adapting anymore." Rodriguez looked at her through his helmet's visor. "Explain." "Their evolutionary mechanism appears to have shut down. The trauma was too severe. They're exhibiting signs of what we might call species-wide PTSD." "Good. Process them for transport to the research facilities." Vasquez hesitated. "Sir, are we really going to—" "Doctor," Rodriguez's voice cut through her objection like ice. "Humanity just proved that we belong in the galaxy. We're not throwing that away because of squeamishness." High above Kethvar, the Council's monitoring stations recorded everything. In the great chamber where humanity had been humiliated months before, 500 species watched in stunned silence as reports flooded in. Zexthara's 4 eyes were wide with disbelief. "Impossible. The humans, they destroyed an entire planetary ecosystem." "They used weapons banned by every civilized species," another counselor gasped. "They committed acts that would make the ancient warmongers seem merciful," whispered a third. But it was Cathon's report that truly silenced the chamber. The silver-skinned observer stood before the council, his usually impassive face etched with something approaching terror. "Honorable counselors," he began, his melodic voice trembling. "I have witnessed the fall of Kethvar. Humanity has succeeded where our greatest warriors failed." "How?" Zexthara demanded. "They abandoned civilization," Cathon replied simply. "When conventional tactics failed, they embraced methods that no civilized species would consider. They fought not for glory or conquest, but for the right to exist. And when faced with extinction—" He paused, struggling to find words for what he had witnessed. "They became something more terrifying than the Vectar ever were." The chamber erupted in panicked voices. Some called for humanity's immediate destruction. Others demanded emergency defensive measures. A few suggested negotiation. But in the chaos, no one noticed the small group of counselors who slipped away quietly. They had seen enough. Humanity had proven itself capable of anything, and that made them either the galaxy's greatest threat or its most valuable ally. Either way, the species that had been dismissed as pathetically weak had just announced their arrival on the galactic stage in the most dramatic way possible. They had turned a world of apex predators into a radioactive tomb, and they had done it in less than a month. Back on Kethvar, General Rodriguez received a priority transmission from Earth. President Martinez appeared on the screen, her face tight with concern. "Marcus, the Council is in chaos. Some species are demanding your immediate execution. Others are requesting defensive pacts. What's your status?" Rodriguez looked out at the transformed landscape of Kethvar, once a world of death and violence, now a monument to human determination. "Mission accomplished, Madam President. Kethvar is pacified. And the Vectar? No longer a threat to galactic civilization." President Martinez was quiet for a moment. "The Council is demanding explanations. They're calling our methods barbaric." Rodriguez's smile was cold as space itself. "Tell the Council that humanity has delivered exactly what they requested. They wanted Kethvar pacified. They wanted proof that we could contribute to galactic civilization." He gestured to the wasteland around him. "They have both." The transmission ended, leaving Rodriguez alone with his thoughts. In the distance, human ships were already arriving to begin the long process of rebuilding Kethvar. The planet would become humanity's first colony outside Earth's solar system, a monument to what humans could accomplish when their survival was at stake. The Council had sent humanity to Kethvar, expecting them to die gloriously and quietly. Instead, they had unleashed something that would reshape the galaxy forever. They had taught a species with nothing to lose that the universe was full of things worth taking. And now, as word of humanity's victory spread across the stars, every civilization in the galaxy faced the same question that had once been posed to Earth. Was humanity friend or foe? The answer, Rodriguez knew, would depend entirely on how they chose to treat his species in the future. The age of human civilization had begun, and it had been baptized in nuclear fire. The end Earth had roared in anger, and the galaxy would never be the same.